Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Cybersecurity Stand Up, your favorite podcast of all time. I have the insane privilege of being here today with Billy, who just finished his maybe second sugar-free Red Bull of the day. No comment on that. It's not my business. But Billy, in case people don't know who you are, can you tell them a little bit about yourself and what you currently do?
Sure. So my name is Billy Hoffman. I'm the field CTO at Ionic Security. We're an attack surface management vendor.
Fabulous. So let's kick things off. You know, the benefit of being here in person at a show like this is that you get some sort of like first impressions. Are you having a good time so far? How are things going?
Going really well. I am pleasantly surprised by the caliber of chats that we're having. There's a lot of CISOs here, and they tend to be saying like, I'm really struggling with how to communicate with non-technical stakeholders. I'm struggling. Like, no one is ever like, I need more tools. Everyone has tons of tools. Nobody needs another tool that gives them like I call it the table of doom, right? It's like, here's the list of all the scary stuff you should be doing. Nobody needs more of that. Instead, it's people saying like, hey, like I have the scary table of doom. It's finding out who should I attribute this to? How can we set expectations ahead of time about how quickly we want to have certain types of things turned around? Like, I don't know, it's more policy and procedure questions. Okay. And I feel at a Gartner event, as opposed to say like a Black Hat or a RSA, somehow just people like their guards down. Yeah. You would think around analysts, they would have their guards up. But no, they tend to be, I don't know, somehow just more forthright about their problems, which is cool.
That is fascinating, actually. I feel like the tone here is very different from these other big shows. Yeah. And I think the slightly limited number of people that actually end up here is kind of a benefit sometimes. Do you find that as well?
Yeah. I think it's definitely it's like as big of a floor as like RSA, but it's definitely less dense, which as a vendor, sometimes when you're trying to get that swarm of people coming, I appreciate it having a little bit more breathing room. Yeah. Also, I think there's just something different about DC versus Vegas. There's a different vibe in the air. Well, there's windows over there. You and I could both see outside. We have seen the sun today. God. We walked outside today and we didn't die. Yes.
It was close, though. It was close. It was. Wonderful. So I also want to ask you, so you've been in the industry for how long?
Give me goodness, coming up on 20 years.
Amazing. Okay, so this guarantees that there's some weird story here, because I know there's always these nonlinear journeys into the roles that you're now in.
Yes.
How has it happened for you?
Oh man, that's a weird way to start. So once upon a time, I had hair. It was green. I broke into websites for a living. So I got my start actually at Georgia Tech when I was a student, and I found some flaws in the campus security system, and went to go speak at HackerCons about them, and then got served with a cease and desist, which was an interesting experience. But that was a great validator, and actually one of the ways I got my first consulting job, helping that company fix those problems. But then how I got my first job out of school was because I got sued trying to get up on stage to talk at a HackerCon.
Oh my God, that's actually like very on brand for like hacker experiences, though. Amazing. So then what? Where'd you go?
So what was really cool is, so I worked at a small startup, which I feels like it ruins you to then work at big companies, because you see something that's silly and you're like, this seems silly. And you just say, this seems silly. Why are we doing that? And at a big company, they're like, well, that's Steve's job. It's like, well, Steve sucks at his job. Like, maybe we should change that. Whereas at a small company, it's like, oh, well, like, that's a thing we should do. Why don't you help make it better? So I loved the moving from sort of the technological security problems to more of the business problems. Like the first company was an application security company called Spy Dynamics, really cool for my ex-spy friends. And often the customer didn't have a problem with like, they needed more security scanning products. It often was, hey, we're trying to tell application developers, security is shared responsibility. Yeah. It's not IT's fault. You can't give them something that is riddled with problems and somehow expect the people who are patching your Windows box and updating AV to fix your mistakes. In fact, our CTO at the time, this guy, Caleb Simon, he told me something really early on that I never forgot, which is that security isn't paint. You can't apply it to a nearly completed product and suddenly you've applied the security. It is, it's an inherent property of the design. So like if you were building a car and it was supposed to go 0 to 60 in 90 seconds, right? Not 90 seconds, that would be terrible. 0 to 60 in 2 seconds. If I built a dump truck, there's no amount of like performance paint or anything you could add to that to make it go fast. By the same token, you can't take something that's already been built and make it secure. It's just the speed of the thing, the security of the thing. These are inherent properties of the design and the way you built it. And so, yes. And so if that's true, you need to incorporate all of this into the process, and it's everyone's responsibility. And so throughout my career, I have found great success in not necessarily talking about the security technologies, but more of like, how do we get the different parts of the organization that need to be thinking about these things and using these things aware, one, it is your responsibility. Two, here's how, don't think of it as a tax, here's how it's actually going to help make you better, right? Because if you're an engineer and you ship something and it's got a bunch of problems, how much does it suck after the fact that support like contacts you and like, hey, we have this problem. There's these 17 things. We have to fix it. Stop what you're doing. Next sprint, you got to like do a bunch of t-shirt sizing and like you have to stop what you're doing and go back and address something. But like if we had thought about this a little bit earlier and somehow it integrated into your process, it'll actually make you, one, a better engineer. Two, it'll make you faster because you won't have to go back and like fix all this stuff after the fact. And so I don't know. It's always kind of been a through line of my career that like we have to take this approach to security and help everyone in the organization understand the role they play in that. There might be one person who's ultimately held responsible for it, but everyone ultimately is involved in ensuring that it's secure.
Fascinating. It's one thing that I feel like was particularly emphasized by the changes that happened basically during COVID, when a lot of businesses became much more digital than they had been previously.
Yeah.
And then they thought about security 6 months later after it was too late. And all of these bolt after the fact procedures have turned out to be really ineffective. So, sort of emphasizing this idea of secure by design and what would happen otherwise. So if you're having those conversations like at an event like this or sort of like in your career, who are the people we really need to be talking to about that? Who needs to understand that?
I'm so glad you brought this up. So I think specifically about like the pandemic, it's people do what's easiest for them and they're trying to get their job done. And so if you're don't try to be perpendicular to what they're doing, try to be parallel and aligned to what they're doing. So something we saw a lot in the pandemic is, hey, everyone is starting to use, the explosion of like SaaS collaboration apps. Like, hey, you have a data loss prevention solution in place. People are supposed to be storing files in a certain place. Well, guess what? Now they're sending them to each other over WhatsApp. They're leveraging Box, Google Drive, like whatever. They're copy pasting something out of your, Microsoft 365 and they're putting it in, notes on their iPhone because they're going to be going somewhere else live. And literally, I saw somebody doing this once because they wanted to be able to have a separate screen for when they were giving presentations, and they were using the Notes app on their phone. And so they were basically copying and pasting things out of sort of the secure policy and the way you were supposed to be doing it, just so they could be doing their calls more efficiently because everything's remote now. But it goes to show like, hey, the policy shouldn't be, let's lock everything down and not let them do, copying and pasting and putting things in. Instead, let's figure out how to have a more encompassing approach to this. Like, security can't be a barrier, right? We need to see how can we not impact velocity, but still provide guardrails. And so like when you're driving, there's no guardrail that goes like this across the road, right? It's along the sides so that if you take a curve and you don't quite get it, you don't go off the road, but it's not actively stopping you from driving on the road. It's a weird metaphor, but it's like, how do we make security that enables organizations to behave securely but still behave quickly? Yeah. And I find a lot of people view it as like an either or, but I think it's very much a continuum.
Yeah, okay. That's really interesting. And so do you feel like where are the answers coming from? Is it about a product? Is it about a mentality? Should we be talking to psychologists? Like, where do the answers come from?
So everyone at my company will probably be mad at me for saying this. It's not from a vendor.
Yeah.
100% it's not from a vendor. And anybody who's telling you it's from a vendor is trying to sell you something, and you probably shouldn't buy it from them. I feel like security leaders in an organization need to understand the culture of that organization, how it's operating. I'll give you a great example. A lot of organizations are struggling with shadow IT, right? People are taking corporate AMXs, they're spinning things up, they're sort of out of policy. This is a challenge a lot of people have. There are a lot of solutions, including Ionix, that help people with that. Yeah. I was talking to a really well-known over-the-top streaming service here in the US, and they actually said, hey, velocity and decentralization is actually a core value of ours. So like we don't view shadow IT as a bad thing. We view shadow IT as individual teams figuring out what makes the most sense for them. What we want to do though is find a way to discover what they're doing without them necessarily needing to like report it or go through a centralized IT org to like requisition assets. And so they said, hey, look, the security policies and procedures we're going to put in place, we want them to enforce and support our cultural values of decentralizing, allowing people to make their own decisions, finding the solution that works for them. And so they looked at different types of products that would help them gain that visibility. But all of that was in service of the way we need to approach this is enabling them, allowing them to make these choices and putting things up that let them do it safely and securely, as opposed to sort of like a top-down, here's a tool, this is the way we're going to do it. It wouldn't have worked with the company culture. And I think if the CSO had tried to enforce that, they'd be fired after 18 months because they wouldn't be effective because it's going against the culture. That's what I mean about that sort of like being perpendicular to it instead of parallel.
And then from a just sort of decision-making point of view, who are the people who are involved with that kind of conversation? Like understanding a company's values and then making decisions based about the technology they're going to use. This is all internal. Who's having those conversations?
So I feel like this is where a lot of people don't necessarily understand what senior leaders and executives do. I think there's sometimes a disconnect between... Yes, yeah. That is the job of a CISO. That is the job of a CIO. That is the job of a senior director of security operations or of even like IT operations, right? Like their goal is to figure out, hey, I need to provide this service to the business. I don't just keep taking my same playbook from company to company and then I roll out the playbook. I have to figure out what makes sense here. Now, what's interesting about this is that there's going to be common components. Like everyone needs some way to handle vulnerability management. Everyone needs to have like a GRC function. Right. Everyone needs to have endpoint security. Can't believe it's 2024 and we're still talking about endpoint security, but 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 you have to do this. But the way you maybe roll those out, you implement it, maybe even the solution you do to implement a GRC function or the thing you use to implement, say, like data loss prevention. I think that's going to change depending on the org and its culture, and it's those leaders' job to figure out, how do I do this function in this unique environment? And so, they have kind of like their checklist of, I need a GRC function, I need this, but their job is to then figure out, okay, in this new role, or this company that I'm in now, what's the best way to implement that? And that's what I think separates, okay CISOs or leaders from good ones. Yeah.
Quick question. Yeah. You say CISO. Does that mean you also say CISO or CISO or neither? Stumped you.
You did stump me. I say CISO because then there's no ambiguity, but I feel like some people will say it and they'll say it very quickly. I'm from the South and I drink a lot of Red Bull and I tend to talk pretty quickly. So sometimes that it doesn't, like, I can slur it. So I have to be very explicit with my enunciation. CISO.
Love it. Amazing. So, a lot of the conversations that I find myself having on a show floor like this, they are with people who are already in the industry, right? They're with people who are experts already, kind of no matter what department they're in, but they get it. But I always like to, remember that we're just part of a larger ecosystem of people in the world.
Yes.
What is something that you wish the general population knew more about when it comes to cybersecurity? Could be a tip, could be a fact. Like, what do you wish you didn't, that your grandma knew, or that you know what I mean? Like, okay, a good piece.
There's a couple different facets to this. Yeah. One, I actually gave a TEDx talk back at my high school a couple of years ago, and it was called hacking isn't sexy. And it's this idea that, like, pop culture, it's like, dubstep is playing and they're typing. First of all, nobody types like this, that carpal tunnel, but they're always doing this. And then they say, I'm in. Like, that is not pen testing. I'm in a Boris office building and there is no dubstep playing. So I feel there is this, there's this disconnect between what the general population thinks about from a security assessment perspective and also from a defending perspective that is just not accurate. And I think that does a disservice because people think, oh, I can't go into this because, one, I don't like dubstep. 2, I don't drink Red Bull. 3, I don't type like this. Or it creates this artificial limitation, which I think I is sad. A positive thing I would say is that having been in the industry 20 years, the type of crowd you're seeing, the diversity, the security and defending is a big tent, and I love seeing how so many people have come into this, and we're just seeing more of that, and so I think we're breaking some of these walls down. On the defending side, I think there's like a view that there's this one thing you need to do, like this one weird trick that will make the hackers go away. Right. And that's also not true, right? It is a simplified view. A lot of good security, it's not products, it's policies, it's procedures, it's understanding, let's analyze this system, let's really understand where the things are that we need to protect are, how should these things connect, where can we apply the security of least privilege, like things like that. It's boring, but it's boring in a cool way. It's it's a problem to figure out. And I think that's what I really would like people to take away, is that whether you're attacking or defending, it's like systems analysis and problem solving, and it's surprisingly fun.
Totally agree with that. Yeah. You've been in the industry for 20 years. What do you think that someone who's trying to get into the industry now should know? Because it's hard, right? Like, the industry has changed so much in 20 years.
This is a more general answer, but I think if you're, because I was a nerd, I was an engineer originally, and I think engineers and nerds they see something and then they're like, I could build a technology that will solve that, and then they go and do it. But then what they have is a solution sort of in search of a problem. So I would encourage people that want to get into this, like, understand, why is it so hard for example, like what we do at Ionix, people to understand their attack surface? That seems dumb, right? Like, how can you not, if this was a building, how can you not know where all your doors and windows are? Like that. How is that even a problem? Well, it's more nuanced than that, right? Like, we're moving faster. It's easier to spin up and spin down infrastructure. Like, there's a reason why some of these problems exist. And so I would encourage people who want to come into this space is to just listen to podcasts like this, but just attempt to understand, like, what's the actual problem here? What are people trying to solve? Because sometimes, like, a really comprehensive solution from one of these giant vendors might be the right approach. Sometimes it's policy and procedures and training. Sometimes it's, hey, here's a control, but we don't have to implement a technological solution to this control. It's a accountability or a culture thing. So there are different ways to solve problems, but it's helpful to understand, what is this problem? Why is it such a problem to actually solve this? Like, it's always more complicated than you think it is. And so if you're looking at something and after about 5 minutes, you're like, well, that's stupid, they should just do blank. It's like, there are a lot of really smart people in this room. They've probably already thought of that. So, like, yes, at least, go wait 10 minutes before you throw the stone. Like, do a little bit deeper analysis, try to understand. And often the answer is, it's not complex, but that doesn't mean it's simple. It's sometimes a very simple idea, but doing it at the scale of an organization, right, it's difficult to do. So try to get a better understanding of that.
Great advice. Great advice. Now, as a final question, we have to talk about something very serious and very important. I heard you had the pig. Tell me about the pig.
No, myself and some of the members from the company, we went to a restaurant around the corner, and we were having a nice meal, and we ordered something on the menu that was called a mule and a pig. And we're like, a mule and a pig, and we're like, oh, this looks like a Moscow mule, and it had some, watermelon or something in it. We're like, oh, this looks interesting. The waitress comes and brings myself and our CEO, who's a very reserved, deadpan kind of guy, these ceramic pigs with the drink in the pig. This looks like something you would get at a tiki bar. And I showed you the menu. There was nothing to indicate on this menu that this would be served in a pig of any kind. The pig had a little lei. There were flowers in the drink. And we're having this is a very important restaurant with business people doing business stuff, wearing business suits, and we just have these ceramic pigs. And so the waitress is like, yeah, it's always funny when someone orders this. I'm like, why does this what's the story? You think how I think. And she's like, oh, that's it's something we just added in the last year or so. And I'm like, whoa, hold on. I have so many questions. You created somebody created this restaurant, they created the menu, the atmosphere, all of this stuff. You ran the restaurant for a little while, and then you said, no, something is missing. And that's something that is missing is a pig. And then you decided to do this, and the waitress proceeded to tell us, oh, actually, there's this other drink called the owl something, and it comes in like this metallic, like steampunk-looking owl thing. And this is like a normal, boring, like oak-paneled sort of like steakhouse-looking place.
Yeah.
I would never think it would have these strange stuff. So it was,
So good.
I have a blackmail photo now of my CEO drinking from a pig-shaped trough of Moscow Mule. And it was a unique experience. And that's, I guess, what happens when you come to a Gartner event.
Oh my God, I love it. I love it so much.
It was so unexpected.
It was so, yeah. And I feel like I feel like there is more of a story there because there's gotta be.
I want to find like the owner of that restaurant.
Totally.
Like maybe they really love pigs. I don't know. But like there's nobody just wakes up and goes, I know what I've been missing, a pig. And so yes, I want to that's another good advice. Seek to understand. I seek to understand why they felt this was a thing they should do.
I wish to understand the pig. Amazing.
Understand the pig.
Well, Billy, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. It is such a treat being able to meet people in person and make new connections at a show like this.
Yes.
If people want to find you or connect with you or, track you down somehow, ask more about the pig, where can they do so?
LinkedIn would probably be the easiest. And if you're interested in attack surface management, come check us out at ionics.io.
Thank you so much for your time, and we'll see you out in cyberspace.